Okay, good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. We're going to get started. There's still some folks coming in, but we'll let them grab their snack and come on in. So good evening. Welcome to the President's Colloquium on legalizing cannabis and what does it mean for StFX. My name is Jacqueline DeLebeck. I'm the Director of Student Life at StFX, and so this is a topic that we've been spending a lot of time thinking about and preparing for, and I think it's a very timely conversation for us. I'm going to get Dr. McDonald to come and just say a few words, and then I'll introduce the panelists and how we're going to proceed for the rest of the evening. So Dr. McDonald.
Thank you, Jacqueline. I always have my mother in the audience to start the clapping like that, so she's not here tonight. Good evening, everyone. This is a very timely and important topic, and before I begin, in order to get this message out, we rely on our friends from the media. So Melanie here in town from Port Hawkesbury, Matthew I know is here. Matthew's here. Thank you, Matthew, and Richard is here as well. So we appreciate you making the time to join us. I want to just put some context of why is it that we are in the middle of a residence to have a conversation like this. It goes back to when I began here at StFX, we started to have a discussion about the importance of residence life to StFX. We are Canada's most residential university. More students at StFX live on campus in residence as a percentage of the student population than any university in the country. And we think, when we speak with alum, that they love their experience in the classroom and they love their faculty and they love the staff that they meet, but they talk fondly and recall fondly their time in residence. And so we ask the question, are our residences hotels that are on campus, or are they something to do with the academic life and academic experience of the university? And in my view, they're not hotels. They have to be tied in to the academic and intellectual activity on a campus. And so we've been having these events in campus since 2014, and we have also reflected in these discussions topics that some institutions may not want to speak as publicly about. And so if you were at one of these before, last year we got into the gnarly thing that was going on at the time about refugees coming to the country, and why is that even happening? It was a terrific night. We've talked about social justice. If there's something that we want to put our thumbprint on about what StFX stands for, we think it is social justice. So we had Sister Millie up from the United Nations talking about social justice. You cannot go on a campus in Canada without, in my view, talking about mental health issues, particularly as a national university that StFX is. More than half of you come from outside of the province. You're away from home. We all have things going on in our life, and so we can either bury our head in that, ignore it, or we can actually talk about it, raise it up, socialize it, and try to figure out what are we going to do as a community to try to make it a little bit better. And I have to say that it was heartbreaking, and I think it would be a huge gap in the night if I didn't raise in a public way the issue of sexual assault on our campus. This has been a difficult several days on this campus that I just got back from almost 2 weeks of visiting alumni and future students and current parents of students. And I have the blessing of standing in front of these groups and talking about what a special place it is where I work and you might live. We all come together and learn in this community. And so just 2 years ago when we met here and we said we are going to talk about sexual violence on university campuses, and we're not going to hide our head, and we are going to try to make it more public and realize that it occurs here like it occurs in every town and city and campus across the country. And so for the purpose of tonight, you're going to, I'll just simply say that shortly this evening, I'll be sending a memo out to the university community in no uncertain terms saying that there is no place for sexual violence in any part of our society, and in particular, the one that I've been asked to serve, and that is StFX. And so these are difficult topics, and they can make you uncomfortable. But as a liberal arts institution, I think we fail our students if we don't make you uncomfortable at some point during your journey here at StFX. We can talk about things that we want to ignore, or we can say no. This is part of the educational experience that will either enrich your thinking about a topic, possibly change your view of a topic, or entrench it possibly. And I think, we are just, the headlights are just about to go around the corner on this thing called the legalization of cannabis in our country. And I am so pleased with the quality of the people we've been able to bring here this evening to start this conversation. It's something we've been speaking about behind the curtain for over a year now, but we need help. We are not perfect yet. For those who work with me closely, that's my favorite word, yet. It's from that growth mindset thinking that at some point we will get there, but we are not there yet on this issue. And so this is going to be one more opportunity for us to explore a topic, learn from it, learn from each other, and like social justice, mental health, sexual violence, hopefully will be a better institution by having these types of conversations. And so I'll end this way, that here we are on a Monday night. We gather here in residence. You've got lots going on. These individuals have lots going on, and yet all of you took the time and made the time to join us for this discussion, and for that I thank all of you. So let's enjoy the evening, and let's learn a lot, and I'll hand it back to my colleague, Jacqueline. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. McDonald. So we've invited three of our three panelists to come and help us explore this topic. What we found, what we've been finding, and I've been finding in talking with colleagues across the province is when it comes to cannabis, a lot of times we have more questions than answers, and that's because we're waiting on a lot of things to be determined and figured out. And these are some people that have had opportunities to weigh in on those conversations at the provincial and sometimes even the federal level. But we're here to talk about what is it going to mean for this campus here. And I think we have a lot of questions to ask. We'll have an opportunity to ask our panelists some questions. We do have three questions that we kind of came up with ahead of time that we're going to ask them to respond to. But before we get into questions, I thought it would be good to set the stage a little bit. So we're going to have a little bit of an overview of what's in the legislation. What do we know so far about cannabis? So I'll introduce our panelists. On the far side, on your right, is Dr. Kara Thompson. She's one of our faculty members in psychology here at StFX, and her research focuses on substance use and youth mental health. So she has a lot of expertise and current knowledge to add into this topic. Ivan Drouin is one of our clinical psychologists who works at the Health and Counselling Center here with Margie. You might have met him. And we have Dr. Robert Strang. He's the Chief Medical Officer for Health in Nova Scotia. And he's been involved in similar conversations around alcohol and tobacco as well. And he's been very involved in the discussions with the federal government from the beginning, so he's very knowledgeable. And we are going to start off. Dr. Strang is going to give us an overview of what's in the legislation and give us a bit of an understanding of cannabis to start with. So please help me welcome Dr. Strang.
Is that good? So I'm going to go through, because we want to have lots of time for lots of conversation, but I'm going to go through, I think, to help clarify kind of where we're at federally and provincially around cannabis legalization. Let me step back so I'm not So, and sorry about the small print, but so why are we on this road of cannabis legalization? It started with a federal government commitment as part of their election that they were going to legalize cannabis. And the rationale there is that we already have widespread use of cannabis, that it creates a significant burden. Our current model of cannabis being illegal creates a significant burden on the criminal justice system. Many people are impacted by being criminalized for minor possession, all those kind of things. And we have no ability to control how it's marketed, sold, all those kind of things because it's an illegal substance. And there was lots of public support in many different sectors for legalizing cannabis. They embarked upon a process. They established a robust, large panel of experts who went around the country doing a whole bunch of consultation. I was part of a group from the Atlantic provinces that presented to them. In 2016, they then gave their report with lots of recommendations to the federal government, the outcome of which was earlier this spring, Bill C-45, which sets the framework of the parameters under which cannabis will be legalized, and Bill C-46, which creates a bunch of changes around impaired driving. I'll mention a little bit about C-46, but I'm going to spend most of my time on C-45. I think most of the conversation will be about that. So essentially, where the federal government has set out some parameters. So they will control, federally will be controlled the production and licensing. So all the rules around that, if you want to be a producer, how do you get legal authorization to do that? There's lots and lots of strict rules already in place for medical cannabis around security of supply, ensuring quality, free of contamination, all those pieces. That will continue to be governed federally. They are a commitment to establishing what they call a seed to sale tracking system. So being able to track product from seed all the way to sale, so we have a good handle on what's out there and then who's using it, all those pieces. The current medical cannabis system will be maintained at least for the near future. That's been the federal government commitment. So we will have this stream of medical cannabis if you have an authorization from a physician, and then there'll be, for those who are of legal age, the ability to access non-medical cannabis. What's been left to the provinces and territories is that we have to then set the rules of the wholesale distribution and then the retail. So ultimately, how is cannabis going to be sold to legal adults if they choose to purchase it? We have to set rules around public consumption, just like we have rules around alcohol and tobacco. A lot of the enforcement of all of this will then land with whether it's police or various provincial inspectors of different types. They have set, the federal government has set minimum standards, I'll call them that, around home cultivation and legal age that provinces can change if they chose to do so. Sorry, going off. So the stated purpose of the act was really to protect young persons and protecting public health and public safety, providing a legal or licit market for both the production and the sale. And the objective is to decrease the impact of organized crime, decrease the illegal market, and then create a legal market. Now, nobody's under any illusions that that's going to happen overnight. There will certainly, an illegal market will maintain for some period of time, but the objective is to decrease that as much as possible, as well as then change so people are resolve the issue about people being criminalized for in today's society what are considered fairly minor offenses about basic possession, all those kind of pieces, and also providing a quality, safe supply as well. So those are the stated objectives from the federal government. The basic rules around cannabis are federally set that the legal age federally, provinces have the ability to go higher. That'll be people who are 18 and above will be able to possess 30 grams of dried cannabis or the equivalent amount of other forms of cannabis, cannabis oil, those kind of things. They can possess up to those amounts in public. People who are under 18 cannot legally possess cannabis. However, if they possess if they possess less than 5 grams, that has been left to the provinces to figure out what kind of penalty. And it may be as simple as confiscation of the product and no other legal sanction. But minors who have more than 5 grams will then be subject to the Youth Criminal Justice Act. So they've said, while it's illegal to have it, if you have a very small amount, we don't want to criminalize you, so they're leaving that to provinces to figure out what exactly would be the penalty for small amounts of possession by people who are underage. They have said that any household, and we're still trying to work to clarify what they mean by a household, and for today's conversation, is a residence a household? Is each room a household? But they said any household can possess, you can grow up to 4 plants, and they've set criteria around height and those kind of things. And the other piece is they've said their role in production, and they've left to the provinces the decisions around public consumption. So essentially, they've set a minimum legal age. You're allowed to grow a small amount. You're allowed to possess for your own consumption in public a small amount. What they've currently said around they've legalized various forms of dried product, oils, plants, seeds. They have not yet, or they will not. The intent is to have this in place of July of next year. At that time, it will not include edible products. But the commitment by the federal government is that within a year, so if we meet the July deadline of July 2019, they will then have rules in place around edible cannabis. So I think people realize that to try to do edibles along with everything else was just way too complex. So what we're in Nova Scotia, we're working under, everything we're doing is anticipating the appearance of legal edible cannabis products on the market. So we don't have to go back and redo all our work. They've also given space that for minor infractions, so if you have, remember, you're allowed up to 4 plants. If you have 5 or 6 plants, or if you have just a little bit over the 30 grams, so you have 30 to 50 grams, those are just ticketable offenses. So you wouldn't get a criminal record. So minor infringement of some of these possession rules. Again, going back to the objective of not criminalizing people for relatively minor transgressions of the law. And again, their commitment about a tracking system to monitor all of this. Very quickly around, so essentially the federal government is shifting now to impaired driving. They have substantially changing the rules now around impaired driving. This is not specific to cannabis. They have, as you'll see in a minute, there are certain impairment levels, which are cannabis or cannabis with alcohol. But they've also substantially changing the rules, which will now opens the door to random checks, random roadside checks, allowing various forms of body fluid, saliva testing, etc. at the roadside, and making some other legal changes. I'm not a lawyer, which I don't really understand, but they say to remove many of the defenses that have been used to essentially get people off, technical arguments which have been successful in getting people off impaired charges. The legal changes have, they say, taking a lot of those technical arguments away. So what they're doing is we don't have a good roadside test, we don't have a good way yet to tell at the roadside, are you impaired by having a certain level of THC? The science is not there yet, but they're setting up rules that you can have the drug screening, or the DRE is a drug recognition expert, so police who have specific training in recognizing impairment. And either of those will be eligible in court. So we will have a system now where if you're suspected, you can have your saliva tested. And there's 3 kind of types of penalties. On the left-hand side, if you have between 2 and 5 nanograms of THC in your blood, it's just a fine and a kind of an administrative penalty. If you have more than 5 grams of THC, or combinations of THC plus alcohol, you will then be judged to be impaired and be charged criminally with impaired driving. It's almost certain that some of this will be challenged in court. So there's lots of space for lawyers to be active here, but the rules, it'll help clarify the rules. But those are the rules, and they're pretty aggressive rules. And the other piece is, I think it's a big one, that this law does authorize now mandatory roadside alcohol screening. So currently you have to have some suspicion to be stopped and then checked, but now this gives the legal space to do random, so you can pull anybody over and say, we're going to check you. Some people may not like that, but from a public health perspective, that we've been pushing that for a long time, because we know that one of the key things to stopping impaired driving is that people actually feel there's a significant risk of getting caught. You don't feel you're going to get caught, you're probably going to break the law. But if there's a risk to getting caught, and there's significant penalties. So a lot of people feel that this is a very important step in our continuing battle to decrease impaired driving and the significant impacts it has in our community. So lots of progress and beyond just cannabis specific for impaired driving. In Nova Scotia, the work we're doing is based to mirror the federal policy objectives. Our stated objectives are to protect public health and public safety, and for those who choose to use cannabis, to encourage the responsible social use, minimize harms, with a specific focus on children and youth, and that is really in there. We know all the science on the impacts of alcohol, tobacco, cannabis, any kind of psychoactive substance on a developing brain is quite profound and have significant impacts across the lifespan. So one of our key objectives, and that's from a public health perspective, should be to delay the onset of the use of any psychoactive substance for as long as possible. We know that people, whether it's cannabis, alcohol, tobacco, if they don't start using by the time they're 20, 21, they're unlikely to use, they might use a little bit recreationally, but they're much less likely to have problematic use as adults versus people who start using it when they're 15, 16, 17. So we're certainly pushing that as we legalize cannabis. One of our key objectives needs to be protect youth and to delay the onset of use as long as possible. So where are we at? So you can expect to see in the next few weeks decisions coming from the provincial government. And where there's three key areas that we need to make decisions on, and those are what we call the first level decisions. And once those decisions are made, there's a lot of second and third level decisions which will flow from those primary decisions. And the three primary decisions are: what's the legal age? Most other provinces are aligning, all other provinces, I should say, that have made decisions are aligning their legal age with the legal age they have for tobacco and alcohol. So in New Brunswick, where the legal age for tobacco and alcohol is 19, have said their legal age will be 19. Newfoundland announced the same the other day. So I fully anticipate that Nova Scotia's legal age is likely to be 19. The model of retail, a couple of prairie provinces have said they're going to use like a combination of, controlled by a government corporation, but then the actual retail will be a private industry. The rest of the provinces have said that they're going to use similar to a liquor control model, where it's a government agency that is given the responsibility for the wholesale distribution and the retail system for cannabis. So that's a decision that Nova Scotia has yet to make. New Brunswick has said they're going to have the government monopoly type model, as has Ontario, for instance. The third thing is about what are the rules around public consumption, and we have basically two models to follow. With tobacco, we say you can smoke in public except where we tell you you can't smoke, which is kind of like an opt-in model. With alcohol, we say you can't smoke in public, you can't drink in public except where we tell you that you can. An opt-out model. So that's kind of like our choices. Are we going to follow more of a tobacco model or an alcohol model? From a public health perspective, our preference would be that we follow the alcohol model, this is another intoxicating substance. And so if we really want to not protect youth and not allow them to or not create an environment where the public use of cannabis becomes more normalized, we should then follow the alcohol model, where there's very strict rules about where you can use cannabis. Now we're going to have to distinguish between smokable forms of cannabis and edible forms of cannabis, because as you can imagine, it's much easier to police where people can smoke cannabis versus where you can eat your cannabis muffin. So those are the three key areas that and so I'm on a group that's senior officials with policy people, we're staff working, and we're producing issue papers in each of these three and putting them in front of elected officials. And they have said they will make a decision on these by the end of December. So that's where we're at. And as I said, there's lots of other than decisions that we then have to grapple with, but these three key areas will drive all those other decisions. And so for example, some other smaller ones that, we have, the federal government said you can possess 30 grams. They've also given the problem, we could set a level of 20 or 15. We could say you could only grow 2 plants or 1 plant. Quebec has said they will allow no home grow of cannabis. So that's some of the issues we need to look at. There's also issues around, we've now created another legal intoxicating product. What about workplace health and safety, like with alcohol, like other substances? What are the implications of cannabis legalization there? There's a huge amount of investment. The federal government's investing $36 million in public education and awareness that we're going to leverage. We need to, tonight's just one of many opportunities that we need to have lots of conversations. So now we have a legal product, doesn't mean it's actually a safe product. So how do you actually, if you choose to use it, how do you use it in a way that lowers the risk, but know that it does carry significant health risks with it? So we need to make sure people are aware, not just of the rules around legal cannabis, but if they choose, so they can make an informed decision essentially, and use it, if they choose to use it as safely as possible. And there's tons and tons of research opportunities here. This is a grand social experiment that Canada is the leader in globally. So my opinion is that we have an obligation to invest in the research to first of all, we don't know what the outcome is going to be, so we better be curious and say, well, let's measure the social, health, economic impacts of this and be prepared to use that information to change course if we didn't get it quite right. But also that can then be information that other jurisdictions can use. So I argue we have an obligation to invest in the evaluation and the research of this, if nothing else, as a global citizen. So I'm done. That's the basics of where we're at on cannabis.
Thank you very much, Dr. Strang. You certainly have had a lot of time to memorize all of that information, I'm sure. So we're going to pose a few questions, and we're going to give you an opportunity as well to ask some questions. There's a few ways you can do that. Margie is going to walk around with a microphone so we can take questions from the audience. As well, I think students, you're probably familiar, some of your professors use this tool, but you can go to menti.com if you've got a mobile device, enter that code, and you can pop your question in there, and I'll be able to see it. And I'll be able to pose the question. So, but to open it up, I've got a few questions I'm going to ask you guys, and maybe just in the interest of time, I might just pick one of you to start, and then if the others have anything to add, we can add some more thoughts onto that. So, I guess, and Dr. Strang, you did touch on this a little bit, but what are some of the potential benefits to the regulation and control of cannabis once it's legalized? So maybe Dr. Strang, if you don't mind expanding on that, since you probably have the best.
Sure, I'll try to be brief.
knowledge
So,
of it.
we need to be honest. Cannabis is a highly commercialized product today. It's commercialized under an illegal model for the black market. But anybody who wants to use cannabis, regardless of their age in Canada, is using cannabis today, I would argue. So what are the benefits? The benefits are, we know from lots of research that if you move a product from a illegal market to a legal market, that there is a space if your objective is to decrease use and decrease harms, that there is a space with significant government rules around it and government regulation where you can actually meet that objective. It's a U-shaped curve. You start over here with legal, and then if you let it be highly commercialized, I know what, I got too many things in my hand. If you let it be highly commercialized, you go all the way and you end up here with lots of use and lots of harms again. So the potential benefit is finding that place at the bottom of the U where we don't eliminate use, but we decrease use, especially harmful use, and minimize the social impacts. That requires a fair degree of government regulation on how the product is sold, marketed, etc. Which the essence is if we move it from an illegal to an illegal, highly commercialized product, we will have not gained anything and perhaps created more harms. So therefore, the argument, what's the type of government rules that are going to be around this is a very, very important conversation. So that's the potential to do benefit. Whether we meet that or not will depend on what policy decisions end up ultimately getting made.
Dr. Thompson, do you have anything to add to sort of the benefits of legalization?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest benefits I see is it lets us change the conversation, right? Especially in campus. So we change it from one where we say don't use to one where we say, okay, how do we use more safely, right? So we call that our harm reduction approach, meeting people where they're at and helping them use more safely. And we know how to do that for alcohol pretty well, right? We know we set limits on our drinks, if we alternate alcoholic, non-alcoholic beverages, if we eat while we drink, that we reduce our harm. And this legalization opens a conversation for us to do that for cannabis. And now we're still working on what it means, right, to use cannabis safely, but the Center for Addictions and Mental Health has released low-risk cannabis use guidelines, okay? And so they recommend things like delaying use till after 16 is what they've put on theirs. Using occasionally or only on weekends. Don't use while you're driving. Try to avoid smoking it if you can so you don't inhale the toxins. Choose lower THC products. So they're talking about harm reduction, right? How to use in safer ways. And so I think one of the real benefits is changing that conversation and opening the door for research so that we can actually figure out what it does mean to use in safer ways.
Ivan, anything to add there? Or?
Yeah, just a little bit. Well, for me as a clinician, since I work at the Health and Counseling Center, Dr. Thompson was talking about the harm reduction model, which is, of course, when someone comes in with either any addiction issues to us, our approach is, oh, what does that addiction take in your life, and what place does it take in your life, and how can we help you to reduce it if that is your choice? So I think with cannabis becoming legal, it simplifies our work because the education and the new publicity coming out soon from the federal government is very timely and also very precise. So we'll have a better conversation. Also a better conversation on that because it's natural and it's been around, that it's good and that it's good for everybody. There are populations, some portions of the populations are more at risk. For instance, we know that if you have mental illness, especially serious mental illness like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder in your family, you're probably more at risk if you use cannabis. So that's a conversation we need to have now, and that conversation is going to be open. A lot of students who come to see us say, well, it helps me with my anxiety. Well, there's a new report out of the US just recently that actually shows that for social anxiety, cannabis is not good at all. You should stay away from it. A lot of people think, oh, no, like a lot of people think of alcohol like, oh, it makes me more active, when we know it's a depressant really on the central nervous system, which a lot of you probably know. So from a clinician point of view, there's a lot of advantages of having this true conversation out there and opening up with with real information. And for us, it's to help people who want to reduce their use, who find it problematic somehow. It opens the door to a more honest and simple conversation.
Okay, so we're ready to have the conversations. We're starting to have these conversations. We get it. I think this is going to be a good thing, but we have a lot of things we've got to sort out before then. So I'd like to get into, and maybe Yvonne, just to build off of what you were saying, what do you think this is going to mean for StFX specifically for our community?
Well, I just hope that we continue the conversation, basically, and that people who feel that their use is problematic, that they can come to us more openly, and that we just see if we can help them, just like we do with alcohol. And of course, sometimes people have addiction with alcohol and tobacco and also cannabis, all three together.
So it's, obviously this is going to impact a whole population in Canada. We are a small piece of that population, and we tend to sometimes forget about the broader world. But what's sort of unique about, I'm changing the question, going off script, sorry. Karen, maybe you could speak to a little bit around what does it mean for our population and the people that we work with primarily, so specifically youth from 17 to 22, 23 and older.
Yeah. We're in uncharted territory here. We can only kind of guess what's going to happen on campus because a lot of it's going to depend on what regulations the province has. Like Quebec has just banned it from campuses completely. So, it really depends on provinces. And what we decide, I think, as a community here, right? What's it going to shape? How's it going to shape the community? I think we will see slight increases in use. I know as a population, we tend to think everybody's already using it, but in fact, university students, only about 17% report that they've used in the last 30 days. And so I think we will see it increase in prevalence, at least initially, and it's certainly going to be more visible, okay? So whatever, it's definitely going to be more visible. But there's lots of questions remaining, right? How do we respect students' decisions to use and students' decisions not to use, right? Are we going to have cannabis-free residences? Are we going to have designated smoking areas? Are we going to let students grow plants? Is it going to be 4 or 400, depending how many rooms or households are in here? And so we have lots of questions that we don't have answers for, but we're hoping that these conversations provide those answers, right? I think there's a few things we should keep in mind with campuses that are specific to us. One is that a large proportion of our students are going to become the legal age while they're here, okay? What that means for us, I think it means we have a responsibility of some kind. What that looks like, I'm not sure. And the other is that we're unique in that students here, we live and study and work together, right? And so that means cannabis doesn't just affect us, but it affects people we live with. And so we also have to think about others, like secondhand effects of these types of things. And secondhand effects on the community, right? We're embedded in this community, and they're going to have bylaws just like the province is going to have regulations, and those are going to influence what campus looks like. So what does campus look like? What does it mean for secondhand effects? I don't know yet. It's really up to us kind of to shape what that looks like on campus through the policies and regulations that we choose to set.
And Dr. Strang, anything to add? And I guess one thing I think about as this conversation comes up is, our campus community include half of our students do live off campus. So in terms of rentals and things, is there anything you've heard around what that could look like and what that could impact students who live off campus even, or on campus?
Certainly we've had several conversations by the Rental Property Owners Association of Nova Scotia. They're quite concerned around the impacts on them, so they own, people who really own rental properties. And they're asking us questions like, or they're looking for government to put in some rules that would at least clarify that they have the option to not allow somebody to grow cannabis because there's concerns around power and moisture and smell and odor and all sorts of things. So they have a very legitimate concern about what does this mean, and they would like to be able to have the power to say, no, I own this property, you can't grow cannabis here. So we're working with that. But I want to I think it's really important now, and I'm glad the opportunity to come here tonight because I've been at several meetings with the university sector over the last few weeks, and one of the key things I'm saying is that we got to make some decisions provincially, but it's not too late to start thinking about what decisions do you have to make on your campus. Like you said, what are the rules that you're going to allow in residence, whether it's growing or use, et cetera. And that is, this is a community. That's a conversation that this community needs to grapple with. and what is going to be acceptable and appropriate here, and not sitting back and waiting for the province. Yeah, there are some things that that we have to provide clarity on, but you can certainly start the conversation. So as I was talking to the president earlier, that provincially 3 years ago we anticipated the likely legalization of cannabis, and we also had things, hookah bars coming on. So our Smoke-Free Places Act used to talk about it banned smoking tobacco in certain public places. We changed the language, so now it bans the use of any combustible product. We essentially genericized the language. So currently in Nova Scotia, since 2014, smoking cannabis has been illegal anywhere tobacco smoking is banned. You may or may not know that. So simple, not simple, but things like that, looking at what are your rules around smoking tobacco on campus, and do you need to look and changing the language on those to reflect how you want at least the smokable consumption of cannabis to happen on this campus. So yeah, it's a opportunity to start an in-depth conversation in this community.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I've been meeting with those colleagues as well, and trying to sort out what what are the rules we can go ahead and start to establish on our campus, trying to anticipate things around smoking in public or consumption in public, and what does that mean on a campus specifically. And yeah,
and I'm just going to write, and don't forget that while not legal yet, it will be coming soon, is edibles. So think about, while you're talking about consumption, don't forget that you got to think about there's various ways of consuming cannabis, smoking, oils, and foods, and there's creams and lotions and all sorts of stuff, right? So you got to think of all of those. And not to go on too long, but one of the objectives under the low-risk cannabis use guidelines is trying to promote non-smokable forms of cannabis use. So if people choose to use cannabis, it's much less harmful to their health if they don't smoke it. So do your rules want to somehow accommodate that? So you're actually trying to nudge people towards a non-smokable form of consumption, and that's a bit tricky because you don't want to overall promote the use of cannabis, but set up rules that in some way tip the balance towards safer ways of use if people choose to use.
that's very true. We have this conversation. We're in a residence right now that has a full kitchen behind us. And so one of the conversations is, are we going to allow people to cook with cannabis? Because from a harm reduction approach, as Dr. Thompson mentioned, that would be more supportive of that kind of approach to use, to consumption, than just saying, we're not going to allow it anywhere on campus, and then, fall into the bad habits again, the old habits. Okay, one more question for the whole panel. And then we're going to open it up to questions, and I see a couple coming in already, so that's great. So what are the implications, health or otherwise, that we as a campus need to consider moving forward, either with policy or otherwise, after it's legalized even? And maybe we can start with Ivan, or yeah.
Just picking up on the edibles thing, right? The pushing it towards edibles also poses its own risk, so I'll say, right? So the lowest cannabis use guidelines don't come out right out and say edibles, because they pose their own unique risks. Like they tend to have higher THC levels, they have a delayed effect, so it takes almost an hour for it to take effect, and the effects are longer lasting. And so the mistake people make is consuming more than they should, or consuming other substances in the time it takes to be effective. So it poses its own risk. It's not the solution to not smoking, so we have to find balance there. There's a lot of good things of cannabis. There's lots of research showing the benefits and the medicinal properties, but it also poses risks, right? Like any other substance it has. I think on campus, the ones that I would caution us to be cognizant of, maybe, in particular, one is mixing with alcohol. Okay, we already know students are heavy drinkers. That's no surprise. And the research is very strongly suggesting that combining the two together has what we call synergistic effects, meaning that the effects are stronger than using either separately or alone. Okay, and that increases risk of impairment and subsequent consequences of harm. So I think we need to be aware that they're going to be commonly used together, and that has unique risks that need to be addressed. Another is the driving, right? I think that's in general public health. We are aware of driving risks, but there's a misperception that driving high is fine. But the research suggests driving within 3 to 5 hours of using doubles your crash risk likelihood. So again, a safety concern for campus. And the third I was thinking was academic consequences, right? We're an academic institution. We should be concerned about academic success and wellness of our students on campus. And the research is pretty clear that acute cannabis or acute intoxication from cannabis use is related to impairments in learning, attention, and memory. Okay, all of which, of course, impact success. You know, we have to figure out how to communicate that information. I'm particularly interested in figuring out what kind of education we actually need to provide to students, what they want to know, what they need to know. I think we don't know enough about the different modes of administration. What does high or low THC mean? What does safe or non-safe use look like? And so I would caution us until we know more about that to be very cautious with our use and our choices, and to make sure, like Rob said, to be sure to monitor the impact of these things for our students and our community.
I think for me also the education academic issue is really important. I'm happy that you're pointing out that in fact regular daily use has an impact on marks. Basically, we want to be very, very clear. And we see that also with people coming at the Health and Counselling Center. Sometimes I see people who come and see me and say, well, I've been smoking every day for the last 3 years. Why should it have an impact right now in my life? So the question needs to say, if the same person was saying, I've been drinking every day for the last 3 years, every single day, I wonder why it's having an impact on my life now. Well, the accumulated use and the habit and so on is a big issue. So I think that now the conversation's open. So people who choose to use moderately, it's not a problem in their life, that's good, and it's going to be education around there. But like, you know, tobacco is a legal substance, and we know the damages of tobacco. So the damage of cannabis is true and real, and it's there. I remember when I was working in another town, there was a student who came to see me, and he had decided to, he was a very, very regular, heavy cannabis user. And so I had seen him, and he was having a hard time to stop. And finally, he came in one day, and he said, "If I finally stopped, and I stopped cold turkey," and he said, it's been 14 days. I said, "What date did you stop?" He gave me the day. He said, "Joe, that was 5 days ago." He thought it was 14 days. He said, "Oh my God, no wonder I was so lost." So, you know, he had been, and eventually, you know, he saved the school year because he went back to, he was a great student too. So I just wanted to give just one little story like that it's, you know, there's danger out there for cannabis. Regular use is problematic. Recreational use, low use, maybe not.
I agree. I mean, this opens a space. I think we need to have an adult, honest conversation. This is now going to be part of a mix of legal substances. Let's not downplay the health risks. And I think there is a significant issue, and certainly the work that we've done in public schools, that, and I think it's an unintended impact, perhaps, when of creating a medical cannabis regime, that many young people now think that cannabis is safe. Why wouldn't it be? Because we call it medical cannabis. So I think we need to be honest about the health risks, but at the same time, we have to be honest about where there aren't substantive risks. So recreational use of cannabis doesn't carry a significant risk for most people, but for some people, and this is part of the conversation, if you have a personal or a family history of schizophrenia or other mental illness, then you need to be much more careful about your use, not just of cannabis, of a range of things. But I think the legalization allows us to keep coming back to this, to be able to have this honest conversation much more openly, and have an adult conversation.
Thank you. So I'm going to open it up for questions from you folks. So Margie's going to be with the microphone. We'll play it by ear, but I'll try to sort of alternate between the crowd. And if you'd prefer to send your question in this way, this is anonymous. I didn't mention that before, but, and I'll just sort of alternate between them, and hopefully we can get through as many questions as we can, and I will honor people's time as well. So one of the questions that came in, can cannabis help those with chronic anxiety? I'm not sure probably the medical doctor would be the best one to answer that. Chronic anxiety, or the clinician. So Dr. Strang or Ivan, maybe?
I'll take a stab. I mean, I don't deal with things clinically.
Right.
Certainly, there's evidence. Actually, cannabis can actually increase anxiety. Certainly, chronic, prolonged use can increase anxiety. So, a quick answer would be that it's probably not the best choice to be using for chronic anxiety.
The report that was just released that Ivan was talking about said that there was no significant evidence that it has an effective treatment for anxiety, and in fact causes it.
And the risk would be that if you think it's going to be effective, you're perhaps missing other therapeutic approaches that would be beneficial to your chronic anxiety.
Sure.
The research on these is in its infancy. So let's be clear that the answer is not that it may, the answer is that we don't know yet, okay? Because in all of these areas, we haven't been able to study cannabis like we've wanted to for a really long time, okay? So we have a lot more to discover in terms of both its benefits and its harms and costs. And so we can do our best to tell you what the current evidence says, but that doesn't mean it's the truth ultimately.
Okay, so we won't quote you, Kara.
Yeah, don't quote me.
Okay.
Quote this report. I'll send you the reference.
So my question is actually related to the commercial production of cannabis and how commercial production would affect the quality of the product being sold. Because as I understand it, commercial production is favorable because it's more regulated and you can control the content of the cannabis and how it's grown, conditions, all of that. But seeing how as though it's also seen as a very profitable, like there could be money to be made in the production of cannabis, how would that affect the quality concerns that producers might have if something goes wrong with their plants, pesticides, herbicides being used to spare costs and fires into these processes? Because seeing as though it's such a psychoactive compound, that could probably have pretty significant effects on how it affects people using it in the public.
So I think the opportunity is that with a highly regulated production, you're actually going to have a much greater chance to ensure product safety and quality. There's been several examples in the last couple of years around even the medical cannabis stream where it's been found after the fact substantive pesticide contamination and trying to deal with that. So the regulatory approach should give much greater assurance, and Health Canada will be in charge of testing product for contamination and all those kind of things before it enters the market. It's like our food system. We have a much greater assurance of food safety by having a highly regulated and controlled food market.
We can take another one from.
So based on what we were talking about earlier about like safe use versus unsafe use of cannabis once it's legalized, one way that we could say that an unsafe way to use it would be if a user becomes dependent on it or is using it every day, it's interfering with their other lives. So what do you think we can kind of change the way we think about like addiction and like repetitive use of substances like marijuana or things like alcohol, tobacco, gambling, even like to kind of keep potential students or users from developing a relationship with marijuana, cannabis that's dependent and unhealthy? What could we do or change our mindset about that to keep that from happening.
I'll take a stab at answering that first from a public health perspective. That by mean I always look at things from a big population perspective as opposed to an individual clinical perspective. And as I said at the outset, we can now have a more honest conversation, so we can actually give you, good information about the risks and benefits of how you're using cannabis. But we know that your individual choices are governed by the kind of social environment in which and policy environment in which you live. So I keep coming back to things like, if we allow it to be highly commercialized, where you're bombarded by marketing messages like we do today with alcohol, and there's ready access of cannabis can be sold on all storefronts and things like that, you're much more likely to end up in problematic use. So some of the ways we need to think about protecting youth while allowing appropriate access if you're legal age, but also creating environments that are going to help you to keep a modest or responsible use, are some of these policy decisions about how many locations do we want to have? How much do we want this product to be marketed? Those kind of things. They're to me are very critical decisions which will govern our ability to protect youth, delay the onset of use as long as possible, and then if you do choose to use, maximize your ability to use that in a non-problematic way.
Maybe just on a more individual clinical level, I think it opens up the conversation around, if we go back many years, the model of intervention with alcohol was more like it's all or nothing. If you have a problem with alcohol, you have to stop completely. And now we've come to more of a harm reduction model. Some people still need to stop drinking completely, but now we have another model kind of in between where there's kind of use that's more controlled. So we're heading with the same thing. We're there with cannabis, but now the conversation is going to be open about that. I've seen people in my practice who, for them, drinking 3 glasses of wine even just once a week was too much. It was too much. So by the same way of thinking, for some people, just smoking a little bit of cannabis is too much for them. Maybe they have a sensitivity, maybe they have someone in their family that has mental illness, but it might trigger their anxiety. For another person, just recreation use is fine. So it opens again the more basic, simple conversation.
So this is a question about the plants, and we know that one strain of marijuana is very different from a different strain of marijuana, and it's not so much the grams, it's not the weight, it's the THC content that we have to be concerned about, and not even just the THC content, but the THC to cannabidiol ratio that seems to be more predictive of the powerful or the impact that that particular plant or administration will have on an individual. So from a policy perspective, is there something that might have to do with the way it's packaged if it's commercially produced that will indicate THC content versus CBD, or what's the conversation around that?
Yeah, and actually just last week, the federal government released a big, thick document for consultation on their proposed regulations. So you always pass it. For those who don't know, there's a law, there's a bill, a piece of legislation. The details of that bill are always laid out in a much more comprehensive set of regulations. So they've put out their legislation, and now they just announced those regulations. So yeah, lots and lots of proposed regulations around product labeling, maximum THC content, all those kind of things too. I haven't had a chance to look at that, but yeah, and I don't think these are proposed. They're for consultation. So if anybody's interested, go on the Health Canada website, and you can find your opportunity to dive into those regulations and provide your feedback. But yeah, all that kind of stuff is very clear, and they're going to set very tight restrictions on marketing, which I'm personally very pleased of. But lots of restrictions around very plain packaging, clear labeling, all those kind of pieces are in the proposed regulations.
Okay, I just wanted to point out that in case you were trying the code earlier and it wasn't working, I fixed it. Sorry, I apologize for the typo. It was funny because I did have a question. I thought, well, a question came in, so it must be working. So I do have one question on here that I'll pose to well, any one of you wants to weigh in on this particular question. So there has been a call for possession of cannabis to be decriminalized before legalization happens. So what is your position on that?
I mean, that's a federal decision. If I'll give my personal opinion here, that if one of the objectives is to stop the criminalization of very minor offenses, to me, it would make sense that now, if there was almost some kind of a amnesty period where even before July 2018, if you're caught with minor possession, you're not going to get into the system. That to me only makes kind of sense, but I'm not a lawyer and I don't know all the legal implications of that.
One thing that I've been wondering is whether there are any good models out there that Canada could use. So, for example, in the US, several states over the past few years have legalized recreational cannabis use, and there are countries where it's been legal for much longer. So, are there any useful models out there that Canada can learn from?
Certainly, I know that the task force and a number of provinces have visited Colorado, visited Washington. They're in a different context because it's still illegal federally. So a lot of what happened there doesn't necessarily apply to Canada. And so, for instance, Colorado had a significant increase in cannabis tourism and significant increase in usage rates. But a couple of interesting observations as you look at their populations in Colorado and Washington, there was an initial blip in usage, but it's tailed off. Uruguay is another country that's, Paraguay has legalized it, but they have a very different model in a smaller country. So I think people have looked at that and say there's not that much that's applicable to the Canadian context. So in many ways, we're on the cutting edge here. And as I said earlier, where it's a grand social experiment that the rest of the world is looking at us.
It's going to be much more controlled here. And in fact, just the Paraguay, I guess, is the only other country where it's legal. Even in Europe, like Holland, it's decriminalized, but it's not actually legal. And there's a lot of people who get confused on those issues. And in some of the U.S. states, the way it was done, it was not as well regulated, and some places publicity was allowed, which won't be allowed here. Actually, my wife is from Washington State, and we happened to be visiting just when it was becoming legal, and it was everywhere in the newspaper, and there was a sense that it was a free-for-all, which is not at all what's going on here. Like, for instance, and tell me if I'm wrong on this, Dr. Strang, but there's a store on Main Street that has all kinds of paraphernalia on smoking, pipes and all kinds of interesting things. Well, this can be seen by children. The new regulation will be that this is not allowed. It's going to be allowed in stores where this product is sold. So on July 2nd or July 1st, this store won't be allowed to display that type of thing anymore. So that's the level of regulation. We don't want children to be attracted to it, just like we have. It's even more enforced with tobacco, but it's like something in between tobacco and alcohol.
In terms of models for campuses too, in US, because the universities are under federal regulation, they just simply ban it. So we don't, University of Washington State, they don't have a model we can copy because they are under federal regulation. So we're breaking new ground, like you said.
Okay. I have a lot of questions here. The next one is, how is the government going to compete with the street prices in reference to safety? Most people will probably get the substance they can afford. So any talk about pricing regulations?
Yeah, so there's been lots of conversation around and an acknowledgement that, at least at the outset, that the price has to be at or slightly below the price point of the street value today. So lots of conversation about how do you set the taxation levels to actually be competitive or to outcompete from a price perspective. And if we don't do that, then we will never get, the whole objective is to draw people from the illegal market to the legal market. But also acknowledging that once you do that, over time, as we know from tobacco especially, price is a very important policy tool to actually minimize use. Especially, we know heavy users and young people are most price sensitive, whether it's tobacco, alcohol. So we need to balance these ones, at least initially, around having a price point that helps establish a legal market. But then how do you use price, generally done through taxation, to actually moderate use, especially heavy use?
I think everyone can agree right now that there's like a general stigma around cannabis users from a lot of, I'd say, kind of older views, not necessarily older, but a lot of people that have views that cannabis is still not good, even though it's being legalized. Would you say there's going to be an effort around with especially young people that start openly using cannabis once it's legal? Do you think there'll be an effort to destigmatize them with employers and people like that when it comes out and there's photos of them on the internet using cannabis, even though it's legal? Do you think, yeah, that there'll be less of a stigma around that, or there'll be efforts to destigmatize it?
I'm not aware of any destigmatization efforts specifically on cannabis. There's a lot of discussion around the need to destigmatize. This is mostly coming from the opioid issue, but destigmatize in general people who have substance use issues, and as well as destigmatizing mental health issues. So it ties into that. My guess would be that as it becomes a legal product, over time, that stigma will decrease because you're just choosing to use another legal product, and the social acceptability will slowly change.
Okay, so another question from here. This one's campus specific, so I'll throw this out there. Do you think that StFX should take action to stop punishing students for possession of small amounts of cannabis prior to legalization? I should probably be on the panel for this, I suppose.
Why don't you answer it?
Yeah.
The moderator's probably allowed to answer questions.
No, I read the rules Lisa gave me. I can't, sorry. No. So what are your thoughts on that, just in terms of how we react before it's legalized, how on campus do we transition from, you know, it's illegal right now to, okay, it's legal. Thoughts around that?
I'll be bold. I don't know what the rules are now, but I think it's certainly probably, in my opinion, should be a conversation. But what are the intended and unintended consequences by doing that, right? I don't think there's a snap answer. You go yes or no, but put it on the table and have the honest conversation about it, because you got to be careful that you don't, you know, do more harm by something, but talk your way through it.
Biting my lips so hard.
I'm looking at you. I hope I haven't.
Against dying.
Just maybe one thing is that the federal government so far has been pretty clear that it's illegal until it's legal. So, you know, any decision that has to take that into account as well.
So I will say, just in case there's confusion out there, that we have for the past couple of years had a different approach depending on the quantity that a student is in possession with. But what we focus on mostly is the safety in residence. So smoking in residence, doesn't matter what you're smoking, is a fire risk, and that's very much our concern. We're not as concerned about students who use cannabis recreationally. Just please don't smoke it in the residence, because you're going to burn the place down.
I have a question following up on the issue of stigma. I think of tobacco use, and 50 years ago, tobacco use, there was advertising, and the government, although they never made it illegal, but they have stigmatized the use of tobacco, banned all forms of advertising of tobacco right down to the packaging, and really put on a public policy campaign to educate people about the harmful effects of tobacco with the objective of reducing usage. What I wonder is, as they legalize cannabis use in Canada now, will the government, and maybe even places like universities, have to develop campaigns to to talk about the negative side effects and to discourage usage, even though it's legal, to ensure that the harm is mitigated, that the academic performance is not impacted negatively. So will there be a public policy campaign that corresponds with legalization, but to discourage use?
So there's certainly going to be lots of public awareness education efforts. The public policy campaign is right now. As I've said, the policy decision, so I'll be honest in this, I'm sitting at various policy tables putting forward a public health perspective, just like you articulated for tobacco, around cannabis, and saying, if our key objectives are protecting public health and public safety, then our decisions should line up in this direction. So the policy discussion is right now, as well as what is your policy, your internal university policy conversation. It's right now. And what do you, essentially what you're saying, and I completely agree with you, is how do you create an environment where you move something from illegal to legal, but not overly normalize it? Because that was our success in tobacco, by banning smoking in public places, banning marketing, etc. We created an environment where it's actually pretty much the norm that young people now grow up in Nova Scotia, and non-smoking is the norm. How can we create an environment? You learn from that to say create an environment where, and where as much as possible, at least a non-use, delaying the use of onset, and then if you choose to use as an adult, moderate use is the norm. And it all comes back to some of the decisions we made about marketing, advertising. How visible is it for kids where it's sold, all those kind of pieces.
What resonate with me was these like fear-based messages that we've sold for tobacco, right? And I don't think there's anything that suggests fear-based messages, like trying to scare people into not using, is going to be effective. So I think it is about education, opening the conversation, being aware that I think if we go cannabis is bad route, we push people the opposite direction. I think it's about finding balance, acknowledging that low use is low risk, high use is high risk, and these are the risks. I think the one place we will see lots of public health messaging is the driving. We're going to see all kinds of don't drive high messages. I think that'll be, the huge public health message that we're going to see everywhere else. With regards to the other stuff, I think it'll be context specific, and I think it's up to us to develop messages that resonate more strongly with students than fear-based approaches.
Thank you. There's a good question, Dr. Strang. I think this one's probably going to be for you, but how is the government attempting to balance the opinions of scientific advisors against other actors' opinions of the new legalization?
I think we've had a consultation process. The federal government had a consultation process. Our consultation process, was very much to try to listen to Nova Scotians. It was constructed in a way that actually didn't. There are other mechanisms to hear from industry groups, and there are lots of corporations and businesses lining up there right now to try to make an economic. Their economic future staked on cannabis. So I think we need to listen to them, but at the same time, we need to have keep them in the right context. They have a certain reason why they're driving their perspective on cannabis. And I'll just be honest, there's certainly segments of our communities, our society, that is very much pro-cannabis. That again we need to listen to, but also say, well, that's your opinion and that's your belief, but when we actually say what's necessary to try to maximize protection for all of the population, we have to stick with being what does the evidence tell us, and that it's not all good, it's not all bad. But again, I keep coming back. Let's have that evidence-based, honest conversation with each other, and ultimately allowing communities to have a space in that to say what do they want to have around cannabis, but not letting any one perspective dominate.
My question is sort of about how guess, usage in terms of people who like work in healthcare or who work in like high risk positions? Sort of what the legislation would be in terms of, is there a certain amount of time they have to wait before they can work in those positions, or like, I guess, like, are they not allowed to consume cannabis like at all, or like, is there any, I guess, legislation to sort of address that at this point?
So that's not my area of expertise, but and I've been part of discussions in government is that our existing occupational health and safety labor legislation covers this. In terms of, we already have other intoxicating substances, your rules about being safe and being prepared to work. What each industry then has to set their own specific parameters, so it's not embedded in the government legislation. So the aviation industry already has very specific rules around alcohol. They're going to have to figure out what they do with cannabis, etc. But the overarching government legislation on occupational health and safety and that approach should already cover this. It's not okay to show up to work impaired, no matter what you're on, right?
I wonder though if there'll be more organizations will choose to do drug testing with the intention that
I think certainly we've been in meeting, some of the petroleum industries and some of the heavy industries are very concerned about this, because they already have high rates of substance use, and now you have and high rates of illegal cannabis use. Yeah. But I think they're looking at things like that. But one of the challenges, we don't have great measurement tools for testing. We can measure THC, but the science is not very good at saying this level of THC equates with this level of impairment. So there's lots of space for that, and so I don't know if I answered your question or not, but.
Okay. There's a lot of questions here, so I'm trying to pick the best ones. Oh, yeah. Okay. Why don't you go ahead and I'll pick my next question.
My question was more directed towards possession of cannabis with regards to air traffic traveling. There is legislation with regards to containing alcohol with regards to suitcases and everything, but I was just wondering what the cannabis legislation would look like with regards to possession, I guess, whether if it's an undercarriage bag or a carry-on.
I'm afraid I'm not able to answer that level of detail of question for you. It's an interesting one, because then you get into international travel. You're crossing borders into other countries where cannabis is illegal. So, yeah, I think a lot of those nobody has a clear answer to yet.
Yeah, there is a federal document giving some advice that saying that if you admit that you consume cannabis while you're crossing into the U.S. border, that might mean that you might get into trouble. So they have on their website, there's on the question and answer, they have a question and answer document. That's the only thing
So one of the questions here, and I know this has come up in our discussions as well, what age group is using the most, and will that change, do you think, when cannabis is legal? Are we pointing? Okay. Oh, okay.
Young people are the heaviest users. Okay, so 15 to 24-ish are heaviest using populations. I would say students specifically are not our heaviest using populations. A lot of young people who are heaviest users don't make it to university. Okay? But young people in general of all the populations, are the heaviest using populations. And legislation has set out to try to reduce that, right? One of the ideas is to protect youth. Is that going to change? I think youth will have lots of ways to access substances. It's just like we have alcohol now. It doesn't prevent young people from drinking. The average age for drinking onset's about 13. So I don't expect to see a lot of change. I think it's developmentally normative for young people to experiment with substances, which is why it's so high. It's not, we should still be concerned about it, but I don't expect legalization is actually going to change that frequency that much. I don't know if you have a different opinion.
Depends the rules we put around it, right?
Yeah.
And it's today there's no lack of access, right? So yeah. I think we have an opportunity over time to make things better. It depends on what decisions.
And I think
we
we have,
make.
it's the conversation again, right? It's opening the conversation and giving youth information to make informed decisions. And if we can delay youth a little bit, that would be ideal.
And so, and that was part of our discussion around what's the legal age, because there actually is some issue with alcohol and tobacco that when you actually set a legal age of 21, your 17, 16, 15-year-old use rates go down. And it's about social sourcing. They get their product, tobacco, alcohol, whatever, from social sources. They're less likely to have social sources the higher your age, legal age. And both in Colorado and Washington, they've actually seen their legal age for cannabis is 21, and they've seen decreased uses of cannabis in those 17, 16, 15-year-olds. So we were trying to push for age 21, but the consistency between provinces as well as aligning with alcohol, tobacco, I guess no final decision made yet in Nova Scotia, but it seems to be what's kind of leading the fore in decision making. But unfortunately, but I think there are over time there are other things we can do and create this as this is a moderate use is an okay adult behavior, and do some things around to try to further protect youth.
With a lot of regular users of cannabis, there will be increased worries by workplaces, and I have a feeling that they would start, possibly testing their employees. For regular cannabis users, it's really difficult to tell when they're high on the job and when they're not, as well as doing a lot of the tests now, they don't show like how recently you took the drug itself. So how can a person like myself, what's going to be put in place to avoid discrimination from the workplace, where when it is legal, they could say, I think, perhaps you're high on the workplace today. And I would say no. And if they were to drug test me, it would still show up in my system if I had used it recently, but not particularly while it's affecting me then. Are there things in place to protect me from situations like that?
I mean, that's more of a legal question, and I'm not aware. I mean, the current rules around not showing up to your workplace, you could use the same argument that you're a regular, it's okay to show up to work having had 2 beer. And I think you may not like the answer, but the rules are pretty clear that you shouldn't be taking an intoxicating substance and showing up to work.
Not that I was suggesting that. I was suggesting if I used it outside of work and they were to test me, it would show up in a similar way.
Yeah, and that's part of the science is not there that, you can still have residual THC in your body from use a week ago. So there's lots and lots of issues around testing and how useful testing is, and not discriminating against people of inappropriate use of I guess I call it an evolving science around testing for THC. Lots of legal questions there as well.
Thank you.
So I know there's been some conversation because from my understanding, the program around medical use of marijuana, so prescribing it for treatment of anything, this isn't going to impact that necessarily. That will stay somewhat the same.
For the government's commitment is, at least for now, that the medical stream, if you feel you have a need for a medical use for cannabis and you have a physician authorization, you'll be able to access your cannabis through that online route as you currently do.
And so one of the questions related to that's come in, and Yvonne, maybe this one's for you as the practicing clinician here. Are there any mental illnesses that marijuana is beneficial for? And will universities be willing to facilitate this type of treatment? If so, you may not be able to answer that second part, but
I think I'd be able to answer the second one. Well, tell me if I'm wrong, but something's out there about PTSD. It's not entirely clear from what I've been reading that it's actually totally helpful. We need more research. I don't know of anything that is where it's actually clear that it's really helpful. Do you?
Just from that recent report, the evidence is pretty clear that it wasn't helpful for schizophrenia.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't helpful for anxiety. It wasn't helpful for
depression.
Mhm.
So the most depression, anxiety, and the most common. The research is pretty clear that there has not yet been found to be therapeutic benefits, and in fact, a small evidence of an increase in depression. It's mixed.
And I guess to the second part of that question about would universities be, willing to accommodate that? I mean, we have an obligation to accommodate things like, like anytime there's a demonstrated need, a documented illness that has a certain treatment that's provided for it, we certainly have an obligation to meet those needs. It's kind of a vague answer, but it depends.
There seems to be a lot more evidence around physical health problems in terms of its benefits than mental health problems so far. But again, we haven't been able to do very good clinical studies on it.
Actually, I'm going to disagree a little bit. There's actually very few even physical conditions, epilepsy, chronic cancer pain. There's a handful of conditions where there's some even modest evidence of effectiveness. Part of that is a challenge. It's been very difficult to study, but I think the medical benefits of cannabis have been, if you will, oversold or overplayed for a whole range of reasons. I certainly can't anticipate that in the next decade, now we have a legal product, we're actually going to create pharmaceutical kind of products of combinations of THC and CBDs, which can then be studied like any other pharmaceutical and produce the robust clinical trial evidence that, yes, that drug actually can be beneficial in this condition, and over time really clarify this issue about what, if any, are the medical benefits of cannabis.
You have somebody back there? Oh.
Yeah, it's clear that the evidence isn't in on the health risks that come with smoking marijuana or using cannabis. And I'm just wondering if you could point me to the best sort of resources to look to for the current evidence that does exist about the health risks. So obviously, you don't have the time to relay all that information, but
It goes through the literature and every health condition there is. So we could, I don't know how we can do that, but we can share it.
So yeah, we'll find a way. There's a couple of things here, but I'll work with Lisa and maybe we can figure out a way on our website to put some of this information on there. Because I think that's a great point. There's lots of information out there and it's hard to know what's reliable and what isn't.
It's really timely though, because with this in anticipation of legalization, there's been a lot of work to gather all the evidence, and so we really do seem to have a good idea of what's out there right now, all kind of compiled in a single place, which is nice.
What do you think is going to be the different approach to educating children in the next few years? Because I know when I was younger, I was getting like Mothers Against Drunk Driving presentations and like speaking about alcohol abuse as early as elementary school, especially, and like very much so in junior high. So do you think there'll be more of a open conversation? Do you think there'll be?
I would hope. Our substance use curriculum in the public school system is currently actually right now being reviewed and revised to deal with two things, with the emergence of opioid drugs as well as the coming legalization of cannabis. So it does give the opportunity that we can talk even at very young ages more, because there's always been this barrier about, well, you can't talk about it in much detail because it's an illegal substance, and nobody wanted to run the risk of appear to be promoting use of an illegal substance. Now I think it gives us greater ability to talk age appropriate wise about this other legal substance like tobacco, like alcohol. That's certainly I'm not involved in detail, but certainly that's the intent as we're revising our substance use curriculum in the public school.
There's a good question here. Again, sorry, Dr. Strang, this one's going to be for you as well. So we have a lot of students from out of province. About half of our students are not from Nova Scotia. So has there been any conversation, and I'm not sure if it would be the federal level that decides this, around transportation of cannabis between provinces and possession, that kind of thing?
I'm not aware of any personal, but my belief would be once it's legalized federally by federal law that a certain, up to 30 grams is personal possession, then there should be no barrier of transporting that within Canada. There's been lots of conversation about interprovincial trade, but that's a whole different volume of cannabis you're talking about. I think it becomes more of an issue, the previous question about when you want to go to another country.
Yeah. But there are problems with alcohol.
But that's for trade reasons, right? Those barriers are there for trade, and if you and the New Brunswick case was somebody who was coming in with a large volume of alcohol, even though he said it was for his personal use. I think if you have a modest amount of alcohol when you drive between Nova Scotia, you have a case of beer in your car because you're going camping in Coojaboojawack Park, you're not going to get in trouble with the police. Yeah. And I think those rules will be the same around a reasonable amount of cannabis for personal use. But I'm not a lawyer, so but I can't see that being an issue. It's just if you start to get into trade level volumes, then somebody might have some questions about it.
And am I right? I'm fairly certain that my understanding is that the provinces though have the option to lower the amount that a person can possess. Is that correct? Or
yes,
yeah.
They can go lower than the 30 grams.
Right.
But so far, no province has done that.
Just a request, please. You had mentioned putting the research document online. If you could also include the low-risk guidelines that are to date, that would be very helpful too.
Absolutely.
So just a request.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you.
If you Google them, they'll pop right up, but I will put a copy, a PDF or something.
No pressure.
The guidelines are a nice, just 2-page PDF, so they're just a very succinct piece of information. Yeah.
I know in releasing potential legislation so far, I'm from Ontario, and the Ontario government has indicated that there's going to be a very small quantity of actual places that are selling the product. I believe the number was 40 to 60 stores or something like that. So when you're looking at per capita, in Ontario recently, grocery stores that just started adopting sales of beers and wine, that was only 400 grocery stores in Ontario, and that was looked at as small. So my question is, would a small rural town like Antigonish, would they likely get a store or whatever means it's going to be that sells the cannabis, or would we be anticipating traveling to somewhere like Truro or even further like Halifax in order to purchase it?
So no decisions have been made. I think there's a recognition, and I'm going to sound a bit like a politician here, a recognition of the balance between what's a reasonable number of stores to provide reasonable local access, but then about having too many stores where you start to encourage use, but also knowing that if you have too many barriers to get legal product, and a barrier could be geography and distance to drive to get it, then you're not going to get people out of the illegal market. So those are current conversations about what would be a reasonable number to start with. There's been lots of discussion as well in many of the policy aspects around, as we enter this world of legal cannabis, is to start cautiously and then open the door. I guess it really open the door slowly. So you may over time grow the number, because if you kick the barn door wide open, it's really hard to close it. It's much easier to, in this world of legalizing cannabis, nudge that door open carefully, monitor the impact you're having, and then continue to open it based on that monitoring. That's the principle we're trying to go, but knowing that we got to find a balance. So hope that answers your question. I can't give you any more specifics than that.
We've got time for a couple more questions. Margie was very anxious back there. Oh.
Sorry. Now that you mentioned the black market, so once it's legalized, and obviously any sale from a dealer or something like that, that's obviously going to be classified as the black market. Are we going to see like even harsher punishments in terms of what will happen to a cannabis dealer now that they're operating on a, like, we're confirming that that's a black market. It's no longer just an illegal product. And then my kind of question, I guess, to the whole panel and kind of you, Jacqueline, as well, is do you think you would re-examine the community code, and would the participating in the black market in residence and stuff like that, would that then see harsher punishments as well?
So certainly that's a topic of discussion. Certainly, I'm at tables with the policing and the criminal justice folks. It's certainly been acknowledged that two things: that these new rules are going to require a lot of enforcement, and there's going to have to be increased enforcement and policing resources to deal with those who are selling cannabis outside of the new legal framework. So you can read into that whether it's increased penalties, but certainly a need for continued police presence. But the conversations I've been part of are acknowledging that we still, even the objective is not to continue to criminalize, I guess, users for small amounts, even that small amount may be from the black market. It's really the focus on those who are trafficking, selling in the illegal market that will require a significant amount of ongoing police resources as one of the tools to kind of let the legal market grow.
I guess to answer your question in terms of the code of conduct, that's I don't know what that's going to look like. It will depend on some things. I know right now we're at the very beginning of a very long. We're going to spend a long time talking about what is the code of conduct for students in general. What's its purpose? What does it do? If we think from the very basic level of while students are here, they're here to learn, they're here to grow as people, they're here to grow in their subject areas, to gather knowledge, to challenge each other and think about those and have these difficult conversations. So how does the code of conduct support that, right? So it's not about, oh, good, we can nail them even harder now. It's more about, and we're involving ourselves in a lot of engagement around this conversation, is what does that look like? What do students expect? What do you guys want from your student experience? And how does the code of conduct support that? So that's kind of where our thinking is right now. On Saturday, we had a very small but mighty group starting that conversation, and we're going to keep having that over the next 2 years to completely rewrite the code of conduct. So there's my plug. The next time you see an invitation for a community consultation, please come. So we can talk about these kinds of things. Yeah, thanks, Nick. All right. One question here. This is for the academics in the room. So does legalization make it easier to conduct more studies and do some more research on the effects of marijuana?
It should. I mean, it really should. It lets us, we can do randomized control trials. We can administer doses to people within ethical frameworks. So we can do lots of things that we couldn't do before. And we can also, even in observational studies or correlational studies, people may feel able to be more honest about their use and about the harms they might be experiencing from their use. There's so many different types of research out there, but I think having it legal just reduces barriers in general to any type of research we're doing around this, and especially pharmaceutical research. I think we're going to see a lot different things in that regard. So, it should. I hope so.
Chuckling. Some of these questions are really funny, but I probably can't repeat them. Generally a question around what's Sodexo's position on selling edibles and things, but that's, I think that's a little ways down the road. Are there any other questions from the audience? We'll take one last question, and I want to give it to you guys first, otherwise I can take from here.
Other opportunities to ask questions.
There definitely will be, yep.
And for us to have more conversations about it.
Okay.
Also get your opinions, I hope, in terms of what it should look like on campus.
Yeah, so just to kind of close up our conversation, on that note, thank you. Yeah, I mean, this is meant to really provoke some conversation and thought around the topic. Like I said, we have a lot of questions and not as many answers. And we're going to be, this is a community decision. We're in this together. Our jobs are a whole lot easier when we have your input and your help, and it's something that we all understand fully going into, this new step in this grand social experiment that we're jumping into. So I want to take a moment to thank our panelists for coming out tonight and doing all of the prep work that they've done to be able to share their knowledge and their expertise in this area, and especially Dr. Strang. I know you're a very busy person, and we were jumping up and down excited when we heard you could make it tonight. So please join me in thanking you. So this was all recorded. It is going to be available on the website tomorrow. Kyler, I hope he's working on that right now. And along with that, we'll work with communications to get some other information up there. There's a few resources that were mentioned tonight. One thing I do want to mention, there was an email that went out to the student body earlier today from me. And it's a little bit of a survey to get your feedback to help give us a little bit of input into some areas that we're exploring. Get your thoughts on, what are you guys thinking about? What are some things we need to see on our campus? And there'll be some more opportunities for that. And certainly, yes, we need to do a little bit of policy work, but mostly we've turned our thoughts mostly to the education and the harm reduction around that, because we want to make sure that students are making educated choices. And just to make sure that you're safe, because that's one of our major priorities while we're here. So thank you for your participation and for coming out in the middle of this. I know it's a very busy time for a lot of folks. Very important conversation, and I'm glad you could be part of it. So thank you very much.